The intermediate plateau. The bane of every language learner's existence. Am I right? This is the point in language learning when most of my students come to me. They have reached that intermediate level where they can communicate effectively and communicate relatively easily, but they know that they are still not perfect in their language or not as perfect as they would like to be. They know there are many things they can improve, but they have not been successful at finding a way to do it. They just don't know what they need next. So today I'm going to address that because I am in that intermediate mode in two of my languages that I enjoy, and I understand the struggle. I know how it is. So between all of us, we can find a better way. Welcome everyone, I'm Bettina and I am a language tutor and language coach. So I have been working with language learners since 2009. I have been teaching English as a second language or as a foreign language, and I have been teaching online since 2014 through various platforms. I have worked with language learners of all ages, and I have worked with language learners in every part of the world. It has been wonderful. And over all of this time, I have realized that there are just a few commonalities that we all have, because yes, I'm a language learner too. There are commonalities that we all have that we can all take advantage of knowing, and that is what I want to present to you in these videos. So today we are talking specifically about the intermediate plateau and what we can do to get past it. So in this video, I'm going to go over three things. We're going to go over the why you're stuck in this intermediate plateau and why I am too. We're going to go over some of my best tips for how to get past this. And we're going to talk a little bit about some resources. First thing, I'm going to get the most difficult part out of the way first. This is the hard truth that we need to accept, and please don't click away too quickly, all right? But I am going to say that you are stuck in the intermediate level because, one, this proficiency level is the most difficult to correct. Why? Because you have a good enough level that when you communicate with others in your target language, they understand you. This is a problem because when people understand you or when people understand your meaning, this is when people stop correcting you. So this is why it is problematic to try to use friends and family to continue your practice, especially your speaking practice. I know this from experience. Trying to get my friends and family to speak to me in the target language that I have is absolutely useless. They will not correct me. They won't comprehend. The thing is, it's not that they don't want to be helpful. They do want to be helpful. But because their mind has comprehended what you mean, they haven't even registered the errors. Yes, they heard the error, but they went right past it. And if they try to remember later, they're like, oh, wait, what did you even say? You know, so it's not their fault. I will say this is a difference between using a friend or family member and using a teacher or a tutor. If you're going with a teacher or tutor, a good one should have trained themselves to listen for the errors. That's what we're here for. Not every teacher and tutor does that. And I will go into that in more detail in another video when I talk about getting the most out of your tutoring sessions. But for right now, just understand that it is not because the person you're speaking to doesn't want to help you in your language learning. They just are not registering your mistakes because they understand what you mean. So they just move right past them. So this is a big issue. This is probably the biggest issue in intermediate language. The second thing is right about this time, you are probably getting bored with traditional learning methods or whatever you have been using, so you're traditional at this time, because you're finding that it's not so effective anymore. This is most apparent when you're just transitioning from beginner to intermediate. So as a beginner, you make lots of advance very quickly, because as a beginner, what you're really needing to gain is vocabulary. Once you have a significant enough amount of vocabulary, once you can start piecing together basic sentences, maybe slightly complicated sentences, now you can communicate. Now you're doing well. But to get to that point where you have a sufficient vocabulary, it goes very fast, usually. There are different languages, different things, but usually you can learn vocabulary quickly and you can start playing with it quickly. So the advanced stage of language learning feels very productive. It feels very fast. But once you get to intermediate, everything slows down and everything may even feel like it's come to a complete standstill, because now we get stuck in using the basics. Because we know we can get by with the basics, we use those as a crutch and we just keep recycling the same words, the same phrases, the same things over and over and over. We want to use new words, we want to use new sentence structures, but that would require much more effort on our part. It would require a different kind of studying, and we haven't tried anything new yet. So it's very difficult to make that change, and some people just are not aware of how to do it or are afraid of making change. It's a difficult phase. So if any of you are in that phase, please remember, as mentioned, I am a language coach. I have experience with this. I can help. Look in the description. I have a booklet for you on how to accelerate your language learning, how to fast track your language learning. I also have booking links to my coaching and accountability sessions, because as you will find, as I will mention in future videos, accountability is really the thing that most of my students are looking for. It's not the grammar and the vocabulary, even though they think that it is. But again, I will get into that in future videos. So if you need help figuring out how to change your system of language learning, contact me. If you need help staying accountable to this new system, contact me. It's what I'm here for. All right, but moving on. So this is one of the reasons why this intermediate plateau is so difficult. So what all of this amounts to is that either you have not yet realized, or you don't really want to make a change. So we've gotten to this intermediate phase, and now we need to understand that what worked before isn't going to necessarily work now. If we want to advance quickly, we need to change what we've been doing. And many people, myself included, do not like change. It requires a lot of effort. It requires recalibrating life most of the time. But it is the unfortunate truth. This is what we need to do. And some of it, actually, this is a big thing that comes up with my students. Some of it requires becoming humble and going back to basics with certain things. So, big example. I've gotten to the point where people understand me when I speak, but I know that my phrases and my sentences are always just rinse and repeat. They're always the same thing. I'm using the same vocabulary over and over and over, and yes, it works, but I'm bored with it. I want to use more words. I want to expand my vocabulary. I want to use more complicated grammar structure. this is a good thing. But understand, this is where the disconnect comes. Understand that in order to do that, you have to find that higher level information. You have to get your new vocabulary, get your new structures, and then you have to take that and go back to basics. You have to go back to practicing. You have to start slowly. Go sentence by sentence. Have your vocabulary list with you as you're talking to the person you want to speak with, or preferably a teacher or tutor, because this is the person who it is their job to go slowly with you and help you, right? It's much easier to work with a tutor on this than to work with a friend or family member, because when you work with someone you know or someone you want to talk to, you want to talk to them. You want to be as fluent as you are normally in your native language. And it's just frustrating because you can't. You just can't. Not at this point, because you haven't learned what you need to yet. So find the new vocabulary, find the new grammar structures, anything that catches your eye that you want to use, and go back to basics. Schedule a time with a tutor or a teacher of some sort and practice. For resources and how to do this, I will give a few resources at the end of this video, but I will also go into more detail in later videos on how best to use a tutor, what to do if you can't find a tutor, all of those sorts of things. So now, what would be my tips in this case? Because I promised some tips, right? So the first thing I would say is find a way, especially if you are living in a place that does not use your target language, you must find a way to make your target language a more active part of your everyday life. It's just how it is. You need to be constantly exposed to using your language if you want to improve in it. So for example, I live in a place that speaks English. If I want to use any other language aside from, I could probably find people and places just out on the street to practice Spanish, because there's a lot of that here. But any other language is going to be trickier. So I have to find other ways to do it. Some of the things I have done are, for example, I have banned English books from my life while I'm learning or trying to learn my target language, because I love reading and I will always read. But it dawned on me, well, I take up a significant amount of time reading in my native language. I can take up that same amount of time reading in my target language. I don't have to understand all of it. And in certain languages like German and Spanish, there are many words I don't understand, but I understand enough to follow the plot, and that is fine. I am perfectly happy if I can follow the plot. So that's one thing. I don't read in English if I can avoid it. Next thing, I mentioned in a previous video that in the evening, when I'm tired, when I'm lazy, sometimes I'll get into wasting time on YouTube or something like that. I'll scroll through videos. So ban yourself from your native language on that. I have started specifically looking for series, movie clips, anything like that in my target language that is of interest to me, and I will just lazily scroll through that. Again, I don't understand much of it depending on the language, but the idea is that I am exposing myself to this language. So that is a win in my book. A third thing that I will mention before I go on to the next tip is, if you have a hobby that you enjoy, that you do fairly often, or even a task that you have to do. For example, cooking. You have to feed yourself, right? Most of us cook our meals at some point. I have collections of recipes in other languages. If I want to make this food, I must be able to read the recipe. That's just how it's got to be. I also knit, for example, and I have found patterns in my target language. If I want to make this sweater, I must read the pattern in this language. Find things like that. Force yourself. You must force yourself to integrate more of your target language into your life. Do not do it to the degree that you burn yourself out. I will say that. Do it gently. Do it in increments, one little thing at a time. Get used to doing one thing in your target language and then add in another little thing. And get used to doing both of those things. Now add in another little. It's like learning to juggle, right? Add one ball at a time. Okay, so that was the first tip, is finding ways to use your target language more. So second thing, choose one focus resource. I have seen this so many times, it drives me crazy. Students will go out and try to find all manner of resources in their target language. This is good. It's good to have a variety. So they'll find books and articles and podcasts and movies and series. But here's the problem. They try to do them all at once. And they move from one to the next, to the next, to the next. And in doing that, if you move from, let's say I read a new article every day, each article every day, yes, I'm exposing myself to that language, but I'm not doing so in a way that I will retain anything new. I might take note of, oh, that's a new word, that's a new sentence structure, but I'm moving on the next day. I have not given myself time to let these things sink in. I haven't given myself any study time to, at the very least, make a list of the new words. Even if I don't go back and study them, I at least have the list that I can, read through once in a while, maybe once a day or so. So don't give yourself so many options that you take away the option to review. I would say have one main learning resource. I always advocate a book, but if you're not a reader, I would say find a movie or one episode of a series, something like that at most. And take that and just review and review and review. Do it in 5-minute increments, one section of the book. If you have a nonfiction book, very often they're structured into very convenient segments. Work on one segment at a time. You can move ahead to the next one, but then you go back. Always incorporate review. Make your lists, make your notes. Use this resource as your learning tool, and then everything else, granted, this will get boring. It will get boring. So in those boring moments when you cannot contemplate using this same resource again, that's when you go to one of the other things, a different series, a different podcast, maybe a different article. Those are all of the things that you use on occasion or in your passive learning time. But have one resource which is a little bit significant, have one resource that you are using as your main focus for your targeted learning time. Make sure and do that. Okay, and then my third tip is, many people at this point in their language learning, they want to speak. This is their goal. But again, this is when they come to me saying, I want to improve, knowing that they repeat the same things over and over. But then, and I always provide feedback, I always provide a list of, here is the error I heard, here is how I would say it, these are suggestions. And some of the students review it, some of the students don't. But if you do not review those things, say for example, I have told you 10 times, you would use this set of words, not this one, or you need an article here, or watch the third person. At some point, I'm going to stop correcting you, because when I make the same correction over and over and over again, and you make the same error over and over and over again, in my mind, that indicates that, well, I guess you don't want to change that error. So I'm going to look for something else. I'm going to move on. And I'll talk more on this in some other video, but be aware of that. Now is the time in this intermediate plateau. Now is when we really need to become aware of our errors. Because if we don't take responsibility for our errors and actively try to remember them, to change them, to practice not making them, we're just going to continue making them. Because the people listening to us, they understand us. It doesn't matter to them if you made the mistake or not. So if you want to correct that error, if you want to move on in your learning, you have to start paying attention on a personal level. At this point, this is where no one else can do it for you. You must put in the effort. Okay, so what resources do I have for you? Well, first and foremost, me. I'm a teacher. As already mentioned, all of my information is in the description below. However, if you want other things, so for example, if you are looking for resources for reading materials, one of my favorite places to look is Link. I will have them, all of these things I will have in the description. Link is a wonderful resource for both learning and for finding resources. It's essentially a giant library of resources in many different languages, so it will significantly cut down the amount of time you have to spend finding something in most cases. So this is a great place to look. For those of you who are not so keen on reading, maybe you prefer series and movies, I love LingoPie. Now, mind you, I am not a big TV or movie fan, but I really love LingoPie. They have a great setup, a great way to go through captions, make flashcards, review what you've learned, pause things, find words. It's a great, great resource. They have transcripts and they have many video resources, so shows and movies primarily. There is also a, what is it, a plugin, I believe it might be, that works with Netflix. So it's not everything on Netflix, but they do have some sort of a connection to Netflix where they have curated shows and movies that you can add into your queue and use the same features that you have on LingoPie on these certain Netflix movies and series. So that is wonderful. I have found several of my favorites that way, and if you like more of a visual resource, that is great. And the last thing I'm going to mention, which kind of goes back to me as a resource, but finding a language tutor. Now, I want to say this carefully because you may or may not need a tutor. I tutor, at least I do sometimes. If I currently have tutoring, I will leave the link, but I have worked with many different platforms over the years. I am currently still with Italki. So Italki, I think, is the best for finding tutors if you want one. I will have that link in the description. The reason I say you may not need a tutor is because many of my students come to me not really wanting to do classroom work, not wanting to do the slow review work and doing the repetition. These are all the things that I believe a tutor is perfect for, to work on your vocabulary expansion, to work on structuring those new grammatical structures and sentences. That is what you need a tutor for. Now, if all you want to do is have an appointment on the books so that you can sit and do your language learning like you said you were going to do, that is when you need someone like me with coaching and accountability. Okay, we can do that multiple ways. Take a look at the links. But if you want someone just to help you set up a plan and stick to it, that would be coaching and accountability. And that is all, I think, for this video. Thank you for joining me. Please remember, if this video was helpful to you, to like the video. Also, please remember to subscribe, because I intend to continue these videos with tips and tricks for learning, how to accelerate and fast track your learning process, and share with you basically everything I have learned as a long-time language teacher, coach, and student. So thank you for coming along with me on this journey, and I will see you in about a week, I think. Thanks very much.